This is Tony Lombardi with Russell Street Report. I'm here with our capologist, Brian McFarland. Brian, welcome into the program.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Hey, I got to ask you, there's a lot of moving parts with this cap situation right now. The Ravens did some restructures and even a couple players took some pay cuts. But let's talk about where the Ravens stand right now with their overall cap picture, and then explain, if you could, for our audience, the difference between what the cap number is now and what the available cap number is for spending.
Sure. So the Ravens cap number right now is about just a little over 17 million, which sounds great. But what we in the salary cap arena call effective cap space is a different number. And that is the number that they actually have to spend after you take into account future expenses, the draft picks, for instance. At the end of when they make final cuts, right now the top 51 cap numbers count against the cap. But as everybody should know, the rosters are 53. So you have to add 2 players. Then, of course, the practice squad as well. So those are expenses, and there's some others as well. But those are things that come into play that can really eat up a lot of cap space. Usually in August, I write an article about that, and if people are like, where did all of our cap space go? Well, that's the kind of things that it goes for. So what I've tried to do this year is kind of show that now, so people get an understanding that 17 million is not 17 million to spend. That they have to be mindful of other things they have coming along. So when you add those types of things in, that 17 million, and of course you have to plan for injuries as well. So some of these are estimates for sure, but when you add that, when you deduct those, I guess I should say, from the cap, from that 17 million, then you're looking at more like 5 million. So that's a huge difference. Now all teams are facing this, and a lot of teams are facing it worse than the Ravens. But so right now, and this is before if they were to sign Sammy Watkins or somebody else, or a pass rusher perhaps, that's before that. That's up to date, but before any future transaction.
But now they recently just 2 players took a pay cut, that being Calais Campbell and Brandon Williams. And what I'm asked often, Brian, is why, with these guys just having 1 year left on their contract, why would they even be willing to take a pay cut?
Well, it's because they both were making pretty decent salaries, Campbell especially at 10 million. Would he get 10 million on the open market? Maybe not. In this market, probably not at his age. So over several years, he could get that 10 back, but why not take a little bit of a cut this year? And what they did is, he took a $2 million pay cut, but they gave him a chance to make it back through incentives that won't count against this year's cap. Actually, his cut actually was $3 million because they removed an incentive that was going to count against the cap this year, replaced that and I assume the other $2 million with incentives that won't count this year. But if he earns them, he will get paid. So they can work those to make them so they several different categories that he was really close on one, for instance, that he probably will hit this year, especially if he's healthy. So because he did miss a few games, so that allows them to make that back up, and it reduces cap this year. It may hit the cap next year, but the cap's going to be ideally a little better off than it is. So that works for him. Williams only took $1.5 million cut. He took a pay cut last year as well. So this isn't the first time for him. I was a little surprised, and we had talked about this, I think on the last call we did, about doing an extension for him. I was a little surprised not to see that, but maybe he's like, I don't want to do an extension until I see where the cap goes next year, because I've taken 2 pay cuts here and I don't want the extension to look like another pay cut. So, and that's certainly understandable.
So you mentioned some restructures. What restructures do you think could still be on the board that the Ravens haven't pulled the trigger yet on? And I'm sure that has something to do with it. They haven't made a dive into free agency the way we thought they might this year. And so maybe they're holding off on those restructures until they do.
Right. And there is something to keep in mind. There could be the restructures already done. There could be other pay cuts that were done. The NFLPA has been very slow at updating this stuff, and this is where all the media gets their information most generally. So they did not update until yesterday. It was the first time they updated since before last Wednesday, which was the beginning of the league year. And they have not updated. I'm sorry, they updated 2 days ago. So they haven't updated since. So it could be that there are others in there. I know there's some others that have been reported that the numbers aren't there for other teams. So there could be more. They could have already done something, but it's also, like you said, if you don't need it, why restructure it? So the biggest place they can get Ronnie Stanley would be a little over 5 million. So that's one, and because he's on a long-term deal and he's early in it, that's a great time to do it because you can spread it out over a long period of time or a longer period of time. Marlon Humphrey being the same, just signed his deal in the fall. That's about 1.8. Tucker, who I assume is going to be here for a long time, he could get an extension the next year or two probably anyway, but his is about 1.6. And if they wanted to, Chuck Clark's about $1 million. Those are really about the only ones. That makes it a little, just a hair under 10 million they could create. So they've certainly got options. None of those would be terrible to the cap, so to speak. So I mean, you'd rather not do them, but this is a different year, obviously. So, but none of them would be too harmful to the future cap. So those are deals. And so that's if there is going to be, they got enough to work with now, but they also, you could do any one of those if you get a Watkins or somebody else, they make a trade for somebody or one of their edge rushers. They certainly have the ability to get one or two of those guys fit in with that extra cap space if they need it.
Well, there you have it, folks, from the best in the business, Brian McFarland from Russell Street Report. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Take it easy.